The Imperial Japanese Navy's Yamato-class battleship was not merely a warship. It was a statement. Displacing over 72,000 tons, armed with 9 18.1-inch guns that could fire a projectile the weight of a sedan over 26 miles, and protected by armor plate over 2 feet thick, it was the largest, most powerfully armed battleship ever constructed. It was designed to be invincible, a sovereign expression of steel and firepower meant to dominate any surface engagement. Its very name, Yamato, was an ancient poetic term for Japan itself. On the morning of October 25, 1944, off the island of Samar in the Philippine Sea, this Leviathan and its accompanying force of 3 other battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, and 11 destroyers had a single, devastating objective: smash through the American landing forces at Leyte Gulf and annihilate the vulnerable troops and supply ships on the beach. Standing in its path was a force so seemingly inconsequential that its discovery by the Japanese lookouts initially caused confusion. This was Task Unit 7743, call sign Taffy 3. Its core consisted of 6 escort carriers, small, slow, converted merchant hulls nicknamed Jeep carriers or Kaiser coffins. Their air wings were composed of Grumman FM-2 Wildcat fighters and TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, planes designed for anti-submarine patrol and ground support, not fleet combat. Their surface escort was a thin screen of 3 destroyers and 4 even smaller destroyer escorts. The largest gun in the entire American force was a 5-inch .38 caliber, a weapon designed for anti-aircraft defense. Against the Yamato's main battery, it was a pea shooter. To the officers on the bridges of the Japanese battleships, it must have looked like a pack of wolves stumbling upon a flock of sheep. Aboard the destroyer USS Johnston DD-557, a Fletcher-class destroyer of 2,700 tons, Commander Ernest E. Evans, a Cherokee Indian from Oklahoma, made a calculation that defied every principle of naval warfare. The sheep would charge the wolves. Evans, known for his aggressive spirit and who had told his crew at commissioning, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way," did not hesitate. Without waiting for orders, he ordered Johnston to flank speed, over 35 knots. The destroyer heeled over in a hard turn, her 4 boilers pouring smoke, and she aimed herself directly at the heart of the Japanese fleet. On the bridge, Evans reportedly said, "Prepare to attack major portion of Japanese fleet." It was not a joke. The laughter, if there had been any on the Japanese ships, died the moment the Johnston began firing. At a range of over 10 miles, far beyond the effective range of her 5-inch guns, she opened up with a full broadside. The shots fell short, but their intent was unmistakable: defiance. As the range closed, her shells began to find their mark, peppering the superstructure of the heavy cruiser Kumano. More importantly, Evans ordered his torpedo batteries ready. The Johnston carried 10 21-inch torpedoes. They were her only weapon with a chance of crippling a capital ship. Charging through a forest of shell splashes from the Japanese cruisers, shells so large they threw up geysers of water taller than the destroyer's mast, the Johnston closed to under 10,000 yards. Evans gave the order. A spread of torpedoes streaked from her tubes toward the Japanese column. One found its mark, blowing the bow off the Kumano, forcing the heavy cruiser out of the battle line. The Johnston had drawn first blood against impossible odds. But now the wolves turned their full attention on the gnat that had stung them. The Yamato's secondary batteries, 6.1-inch guns, opened fire, then a full salvo from its 18-inch main battery. The world ended in sound and water. The shells created concussions that felt like the ocean itself being torn apart. One 14-inch shell, likely from the battleship Congo, struck the Johnston's bridge, destroying the steering gear, wounding Evans and killing many around him. Another salvo wrecked the after engine room. The Johnston's speed bled away. She was crippled, burning, and wallowing. Yet she was not dead. With local control and heroic damage control, her remaining guns kept firing. Evans, his uniform shredded and covered in blood, commanded from the open, wrecked afterdeck. The Johnston became a stationary gun battery, pouring shells into any Japanese ship that came within range. Her defiance was infectious. Seeing the Johnston's charge, the other destroyers, USS Hull and USS Heermann, and the tiny destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts joined the attack. The Roberts, with only two 5-inch guns and a top speed that left her trailing, earned the nickname, the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship, charging so close to a heavy cruiser that the Japanese guns could not depress enough to hit her. But the true victory of Taffy 3 was not won by guns alone. It was won by the relentless, suicidal attacks of the carrier-based aircraft. Pilots flying Wildcats and Avengers, armed for ground support with general-purpose bombs and depth charges, useless against armored warships, launched anyway. They made strafing runs with their .50 caliber machine guns. They dropped their ordnance, hopping for a lucky hit on a deck or to distract the anti-aircraft gunners. When they ran out of ammunition, they made dry runs, pretending to attack to force the Japanese ships into evasive maneuvers. The sky was filled with desperate, courageous men creating a tactical nightmare for the Japanese Admiral Takeo Kurita. The Japanese commander was suffering from what military theorists call the fog of war. But in his case, it was a typhoon of misinformation and perceived threat. The ferocity of the destroyer attacks and the sheer volume of aerial sorties, hundreds of planes from Taffy 3 and the neighboring Taffy groups, convinced him he was not facing escort carriers, but the fast carriers of Halsey's main fleet. The 5-inch shells splashing around his ships, he reportedly believed, were the opening ranging shots from the 8-inch guns of American heavy cruisers. Every minute spent maneuvering to avoid non-existent torpedoes or chasing off aircraft was a minute the precious invasion fleet escaped. The loss of the Kumano and damage to other cruisers from the destroyers, attacks weighed on him. Aboard the shattered Johnston, the end approached. After over 2.5 hours of relentless punishment, surrounded by Japanese warships that circled her like sharks, she was dead in the water. A Japanese destroyer squadron closed to point-blank range and finished her. Commander Evans gave the order to abandon ship. He was last seen, wounded and alone on the stern, waving to his men as they went into the water. He did not survive. The Johnston rolled over and sank, taking 186 of her crew with her. At this moment, Admiral Kurita made his historic decision. He had broken through to the open sea. The sheep, the escort carriers and transports were within his grasp, yet believing he faced a far larger force, concerned about the whereabouts of Halsey's true carriers, and with his formation scattered by the relentless, chaotic attacks, he gave the order that still baffles historians. He withdrew. He turned the mighty Yamato and the rest of the center force around and sailed away from the Leyte beachhead. The tiny warships and baby flat tops of Taffy 3 had achieved what the entire American battle line had been built to do. They had stopped the Japanese surface fleet. They did it not with superior armor or firepower, but with something the designers of the Yamato had badly underestimated: unyielding aggression and the willingness to sacrifice everything in a single, defiant moment. The Yamato would meet her end months later, sunk by overwhelming American carrier air power in a one-way mission to Okinawa. But her myth of invincibility was shattered forever off Samar, not by a pier, but by a 2,700-ton destroyer that refused to yield. The crew of the Johnston and their comrades in Taffy 3 had proven that the most powerful weapon in a warship's arsenal is not the size of its guns, but the courage of the crew within its hull. They had not just saved the landing at Leyte. They had authored the final, definitive epitaph for the age of the battleship.